I've been doing sit-ups. After only 3 weeks since the release of Somnophobia, the fourth Tales from the Pizzaplex book, Submechanophobia, has released. In today's video, I'll be doing a summary on the first story in the book, Submechanophobia. The other two stories in the book are Animatronic Apocalypse and The Bobby Dots Part 1. I'll be doing summaries on both those stories and the fourth Tales epilogue, so stay tuned for those summaries, but now it's time to begin Submechanophobia. So without further ado, let's get started.
Make me a hero, someone to turn to and rely on their will to win. Make me a hero who puts up a fight both day and night. Oh.
The main character of the story is Kaden, a dude working at Freddy's Fantasy Water Park, a water park owned by a man named Martin Copper. Kaden was working in what his boss had named the Freddy's Sea Life Mechaquarium, which was the only place in the park that actually housed underwater animatronics, such as a sea dragon, a couple sea serpents, a few sharks, assorted fish, a mermaid, and a scuba diver, all in a tank with an actual human-made underwater environment. People weren't allowed where Kaden was right now, but it seemed like some kid had snuck through the maintenance and was banging on the glass angry that the dragon wouldn't look at him. Kaden tried to explain that it was an animatronic and wasn't an actual dragon, and the kid claimed that this place sucks, banged on the glass some more, spit gum onto the glass, and shot Kaden in the chest with a water gun, and then left this area he shouldn't have been in the first place. Kaden cleaned the gum off the glass, and then Martin Copper, the owner, showed up to check on him. We get some exposition of the park, such as a layout and stuff, but we also learned that this park had been popular years ago, but ended up closing down for years. However, Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex opened up 2 towns over, so the water park opened back up to feed off the success. Kaden's job was to make sure everything in the water park was quality content, something I can understand, and basically just to make sure that nothing in the park goes wrong to get it shut down. He's basically like grading claustrophobia. He's the technician. Kaden is also 19 and has submechanophobia, and that was problematic because of pretty much everything about this new job. But he needed the job to pay for his grandmother's house bills as she was in a nursing home and wanted her house to remain in good condition. His grandmother was the one to raise him after his parents died at sea during a second honeymoon, which was what sparked his submechanophobia. One of the things that he had to do for this job was fix up the animatronics. Martin was explaining all this and how he needs Kaden to ensure that they don't lose money, and the mermaid seemingly vanished right then. They saw that the mermaid had landed on a rock at the bottom of the tank, one eye missing, her arms crooked, and her mouth making an expression as if she had drowned. Martin told him to fix it, and Kaden said it would be no problem, but of course for him, it was. He grabbed the suit used for diving into the tank and prepared himself for it, trying to tell himself he was fearless and brave. Eventually, he slipped into the water, but when he did, he was face to face with one of the shark animatronics. Scared of what he was seeing, he accidentally flung himself into the scuba diver. He was scared it was grabbing him, so he screamed, the respirator coming out of his mouth and filling his mouth with water. He shot back up to the surface, realizing everything was fine, there was nothing here to hurt him. After some thinking, he managed to find a path that would keep him away from the animatronics to and from the mermaid, so he dove down. He worried the animatronics were still on, but they had been powered off. He had nothing to worry about. But that didn't stop his fear from kicking in here and there. However, he was able to fix the mermaid and breathed a sigh of relief. After changing back into his regular clothes, a co-worker named Roy let Kaden know that Hank was down. Roy had basically given all the animatronics names, and Hank was the name of the DEA agent, I mean one of the sharks. Kaden wasn't particularly excited about this, but he would have managed. However, just then, Kaden's school nemesis Daryl and a girl named Yasmin and her little sister Marie went up to Kaden, surprised he was working at a water park of all places given his fear. Daryl was kind of a dick, never forgetting about Kaden's submechanophobia and always bullied him for it. Yasmin explained that they brought Marie here to see the sea creatures, but they were shutting them down now. In response to this, Daryl said that this place sucks in comparison to the Mega Pizzaplexes, and that he went to one by their school and it puts the water park to shame. This is very interesting because he says Mega Pizzaplexes, as in multiple, so that means there are multiple Mega Pizzaplexes. Well, only one with Vanny in the FNaF 6 building, obviously, but it does make you wonder, like, if maybe the other stories take place in a different one, or if maybe those are just attractions that ended up people got rid of them or something. I don't know. It could be either. I feel like it's more likely that they were originally the attractions at our Pizzaplex and then they just got shut down rather than being a different one, considering how the fact that this Pizzaplex is the same one through multiple different stories and it's basically focused on, so why would it not be the one that we know? I don't know. It could be a different one though. So Kaden reassures Marie that the animatronics will be back up and running in no time, as he'll just be going to fix them up in a second, and Daryl is shocked that Kaden is actually the technician here. Kaden pretended to see Martin as an excuse to get away from Daryl and Yasmin, and headed over to fix Hank. Somehow Hank was upside down inside the tank, and Kaden didn't know how that happened or how he'd fix it. He once again had to prepare himself to get into the tank. Once he did, he struggled to get underneath Hank just because of the idea of a machine underwater being directly above him. However, once he got under him, he suddenly noticed that the sea dragon, by far the biggest of the animatronics and named Zeus, was suddenly next to him, and he didn't see him there before. He thought he was just not paying attention, but a few seconds later, Zeus was even closer. Kaden was backed up against the wall, with Zeus drifting closer and closer to him, and eventually he stopped moving. Kaden saw black oil all around Zeus's mouth and in the darkness of the water tank. It looked almost like dried blood. He noticed what he thought was a wire in the mouth, but when he pulled it out, he found that it was actually not a wire but a shoelace, and he pulled out an entire child's shoe. If this sounds familiar, it should, because it's actually similar to the Freddy's repair minigame from FNaF VR, where there is a hat in Freddy's mouth and an entire shoe in his chest. We suddenly cut to later that night when Kaden is dreaming about what really boosted his submechanophobia. When he was in 2nd grade, there was an incident he called the 2nd grade field trip gone horribly wrong. Very creative name. What happened was, on a field trip to an amusement park in 2nd grade, Kaden and his classmates had a fake submarine ride. Basically, they stepped into a boat and there would be glass around them, sort of imitating the underwater. Kaden wasn't enjoying himself. An animatronic whale came on one side of the glass. Kaden screamed and backed up, accidentally hitting an alarm thing on the wall, and ended up peeing his pants. Everyone made fun of him for this, including Daryl, and that's what he would always bully Kaden about. He woke up at 3:03 a.m., thought about his life, questioned the shoe, then decided it was nothing and went back to bed. The next day, Roy was handing out ice cream, and when there wasn't anyone waiting for some, Roy and Kaden sat together eating ice cream at a picnic table. Kaden decided to ask Roy about this water park because Roy used to go to it as a kid before it closed down. Roy was like a decade and a half older than him, so yeah. Kaden asked if Roy knew why it shut down. There had been rumors that Copper had run out of money, basically, is what Roy explained. But it was always packed, so that didn't really make sense. So Roy didn't know. Kaden then asked if he used to sneak around to see the animatronics up close, and Roy said that he did all the time, and the animatronics back then would almost be like his friends, cause he was a kid. Kaden told Roy about the shoe, both saying it was probably just that someone threw it in there, but Roy seemed unsettled by the fact that it was in there. And that unsettled Kaden. Later that day, Kaden was approached by Martin asking about the shoe. Roy must have told him. Martin said that from now on, let him know if he finds anything. He claimed it was most likely a prank, as a bunch of kids pulled pranks back then, and he even had to hire security to ensure kids stopped breaking into the park after closing. Now Roy had been security. Kaden asked Martin about the animatronics moving even after their power is shut off, and Martin seemed to get really offended. Apparently someone else had asked him the same thing before, and it's really just them getting spooked and they're not actually moving, according to Martin. It's just their imagination. Kaden knew that wasn't true, but he went along with it. Also, I noticed a slight inconsistency with the story. The earlier parts of the story tells us that this was a Friday. The beginning of the story was a Friday, but now it's the next day, and it's somehow the middle of the week when it should be Saturday. But it's a minimal mistake, it's not a big deal. Kaden had no desire to get back into the tank, and he hadn't since the Zeus thing yesterday. But of the two sea serpents, named Marco and Polo, Polo had disappeared. He found that Polo was at the bottom of the tank. He thought to just wait a while before fixing him, but then he was called by another employee named Ava, who told him Roy had told her to tell him Polo was down. So Kaden had to go into the tank. He thought maybe the whole Zeus thing yesterday could have just been because of the current he created as he moved through the water, so he headed in. He made it down to Polo, but he looked up to find that Frank the diver had changed positions and was now looking directly at him, like it was spying on him. Kaden clicked the reset button on Polo and it jerked back, and it seemed to break off a piece of scenery, what he thought was a rock, but it didn't seem like one, especially since this thing floated and rocks didn't. Kaden thought it looked interesting and he put it in his tool pouch. However, just then his air supply began thinning. Then it disappeared. He couldn't breathe. He tried to swim out, but the tool pouch got stuck. Frank was moving closer. He couldn't breathe and he was struggling to get out. But finally he got unstuck and he got back up. He always made sure his air supply was enough, so he didn't know how this could have happened. He took the rest of the day off and went to visit his grandmother in the nursing home. She had Alzheimer's and her short-term memory was pretty bad, but when Kaden told her he worked at Freddy's Fantasy Water Park, she told him she remembered a strange, mysterious story that happened there a long time ago. She went to take a nap without telling him what the story was, though. Kaden took the supposed rock out of his pocket and realized it wasn't a rock, it was a small bone. We cut to him at the water park at night, and he finds that all the lights are off except the ones at the mech aquarium. He bumped into a dude in a Freddy Fazbear costume on his way over to the mech aquarium, where so many kids were crowded around the tank. The mech aquarium had been off limits, only for people to look at, not go up to, and inside, all the animatronics' eyes were glowing brighter than usual, and they were all swimming faster than usual. It was like they were possessed. Kaden tried to call for the kids to stop banging on the glass, but they didn't listen. Some kids were even trying to climb the ladder up to the top of the tank, and Kaden tries to stop them, but there were too many kids and he couldn't stop them. Some of the kids even began crowding around him and tugging on his shirt and arms. Martin, Ava, and Roy were all there too, just watching as the kids climbed. Kaden yelled for them to stop the kids, but they just stood there and stared, huge grins on their faces. The kids jumped into the tanks and the animatronics began biting the kids, filling the tank with blood. The mermaid even ripped off a kid's arm. Suddenly, both of Kaden's dead parents appeared behind him, turning him to look at them, and their bodies looked like corpses. Suddenly, he woke up from this nightmare. He didn't go back to sleep for the rest of the night. Early in the morning, Kaden got a call that his grandma had missed her health insurance payment and needed it ASAP. Kaden got them to agree to one more week as he had a lot going on right now. He began looking through some of his grandma's things and found some newspaper articles that she had kept for some reason. One headline caught his eye, one from over 20 years ago about a 5-year-old boy named Jason Butterfield who had gone to Freddy's Fantasy Water Park, went home, and then was gone the next morning, his window left open. He had last been seen wearing a blue sweatshirt, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes. This set off alarms in Kaden's head because that matched the shoes he found in Zeus's mouth. He researched bones at the library and found that the one from the tank seemed to be a small finger bone. The fact that it was small could have matched Jason. He headed to work where Martin warned him that if he wasn't careful he'd be fired, but he was glad he was alright after the incident yesterday. Roy also came over to check on him, and Kaden asked Roy if he knew about Jason Butterfield. Jason had actually gone to school with Roy, and when he went missing, it was all anybody ever talked about. Kaden asked Roy if he thought maybe Jason could have snuck back here to the water park, but Roy dodged the question. He told him to be careful in the tank in a strange tone. Kaden began wondering whether Jason came here and snuck into the tank without anyone finding out, or if someone did find out and kept it a secret. Kaden finished all he had to do before the park opened for the day, so he headed into the workshop. There had been some old Freddy's, Chica, and Foxy costumes in there, a bunch of boxes of screws and stuff like that, as well as a relatively small orange squid animatronic that he'd fiddled with a few times, and decided to now since he didn't have anything else to do right now. As he was working, the thought of Jason kept entering his mind. He tried to convince himself it was a coincidence and the bone he found was just a prop, but he couldn't shake the thought. While he was working, suddenly the lights in the workshop shut off. He called out for whoever was there to not turn them off because he was in there, but there was no response, and the lights remained off. The room was pitch black. He searched around for where his flashlight was, but he couldn't see anything. His finger pricked something he couldn't see, and he cut himself. He moved back to grab his phone when suddenly there was a loud crash and wind and light rushed into the room. The light was enough to reveal a shelf had fallen right where Kaden was just standing, and if he hadn't moved, he probably would have died. We cut to Roy and Martin fixing everything up, and Martin told Kaden that he had warned him what would happen if he had another accident. However, Kaden explained that it wasn't him. He thinks that maybe someone turned off the light and opened the door, as that's what it sounded like. Martin thought it could be that the pranks were starting again, and that thought infuriated him, prompting him to storm out of the room. Kaden wondered whether or not it was really kids playing pranks, or maybe someone trying to stop him from learning the truth about Jason Butterfield. On lunch, Kaden thought about the 2 near-death experiences he'd had, and he wondered whether or not they were just freak accidents. He was standing in line waiting to get a pizza slice when suddenly there was a loud horn sound and silly string was sprayed into his face. He turned to see Daryl and Marie. He basically had the idea that maybe it was Daryl doing this stuff, but he didn't seem to know what he was talking about. He actually stood up to Daryl, and as he went to grab his pizza, he turned back to see Daryl was gone without saying a word. Kaden was glad that he might be done with Daryl, and the next morning he found himself at the police station, planning to tell the police about his discovery. But once he was there, he realized that not only was it possible the police wouldn't believe it, but he would surely lose his job for causing Martin this much trouble. He began walking away and ran into Chief Jackson, the cop who had been the one to inform Kaden and his grandma about his parents' death all those years ago. They spoke for a bit until Kaden left for work. That night, Kaden actually hoped that there would be an issue with one of the animatronics because he wanted an excuse to look under there for clues. Unfortunately, no animatronics did need any repairs, but he knew Roy's security schedule and was able to sneak into the tank without Roy noticing. All the animatronics were coincidentally lined up against the side of the tank, making room for Kaden to search. As he did, the diver moved slightly closer and all the animatronics were looking at him. He convinced himself that it was fine and searched. Right before he planned to stop, he found a literal human skull in there. He finally had definitive proof that there were remains of a human body in that tank. However, as he was about to leave, the tarp above him began closing. He wasn't quick enough to escape and he was now trapped inside. He didn't think he would have enough air to last the whole night. Frank the diver was swimming towards him, but not like how Zeus was earlier. He was full on swimming around like a human. Kaden tried to avoid him, but the diver managed to grip him and was crushing him. It began choking him, so Kaden pulled out his screwdriver and pried the helmet off the diver's body. The diver let go of him, and Kaden realized that it was actually Martin in the diver suit. Martin was trying to kill him. Martin tried grabbing Kaden and all the other animatronics began circling them. Martin had no more air supply and he was drowning. All the animatronics grabbed them and eventually the static that had been in Kaden's ears the entire time stopped as the animatronics let go of them and Martin's now dead body floated through the water. We then cut to a week later, but it's explained to us what had happened. Kaden had managed to open up the tarp and free himself, and he got Roy's help to get the body out. They ended up calling emergency services, and Kaden told the police everything that had happened. Kaden was framed as a hero, and many people brought him food to praise him for finding the truth about what happened to Jason Butterfield. It was theorized that he had snuck to the water park one night and drowned inside it, Martin finding his body in the tank and burying his remains within it. Then, when Kaden grew closer and closer to the truth of what happened, he began causing incidents to try and kill him to prevent him from finding out what really happened. In the end, Roy reveals that he has actually bought the water park and would be opening it back up, making it better than it ever was. The story ends with him asking Kaden if he's in, and he doesn't respond. Overall, I think the story was pretty good. I feel like the ending was a bit lackluster. It's cool that it's the only story so far where the main character actually survives, but the ending is written in a way that implies malice, but it doesn't seem like Roy actually has malicious intent. But I think it's meant to say that Kaden needs a job for money, and this is the only one he'll get, meaning he's once again going to have to work on the underwater animatronics. So that is kind of disturbing for him, but it's not really something that is actually dangerous unless he somehow doesn't fill his air up or whatever, so it's not really a big deal. So I feel like the ending of the story was written a little bit strangely, but I do think the story was good, though not the best. But what do you guys think? Did you enjoy the story? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and stay tuned for my next video, which will be a summary on the second story, Animatronic Apocalypse. So I'm going to end the video there, and I'll see you all, most likely, tomorrow with Animatronic Apocalypse. Join the Fazbear Fan Club every Tuesday and Thursday after school for 5th and 6th graders. Room 13, be there or beware of the animatronic apocalypse.